Hey everyone, welcome to Sasquatch Theory. I hope everybody's keeping warm out there. In today's episode, I will be talking about the whistle incident and my second eye sighting. I honestly consider this one my first real eye sighting, as I got a really good look at the individual. Let's get into it. The story begins in the summer of 2019. As my luck in life began to diminish, things went from bad to worse. I literally woke up one day with a bad back pain. The problem seemed to worsen over time, and nothing seemed to help. I found myself limping around everywhere I'd go. So I went to the doctor and got a CT scan on my back. The doctor told me I had 2 herniated discs in my back and sciatica in the right leg. The doctor asked if I had been in an accident or if I had done something to injure myself in this way. I told him not at all, and it all seemed to have developed on its own. Medications didn't work, and sleep was a difficult thing to achieve. Nothing would relieve the pain as far as Tylenol or ibuprofen. I began doing physical therapy. It didn't seem to help, and in my opinion, it only made things worse. The pain was constant, and it felt like someone shot me in the back. As far as my right leg, I could only lift it up so far until I would feel an unimaginable pain. I had already gone through the winter, and it was now early summer. I started walking my driveway road because laying down was getting old. I began to feel better after walking and getting exercise. Since walking and laying down were about all I could do, that's exactly what I started doing. I had made the decision I wasn't going to let this get in the way of deer hunting. I put up several trail cameras on key areas of my property. In this area of Missouri, there is forest around every corner of the county. The deer would move from one major bedding area and move to another bedding area. My house and property lies in between that transition zone. It is basically a funnel for game activity. Last year I hunted down by the creek bottom and saw deer every single day. It was one of the best years I ever had. I wasn't going to miss out this year because of some back problem. As much as my back problems bothered me, I had to hand it to myself. I was getting after it. I began to notice that staying active was making the symptoms a little better. It was also healthy for my mind at the same time, as I had many other issues to deal with. I couldn't even sit and play guitar without feeling pain. I couldn't hang out with my friends that lived an hour away. It was just a downtime in my life that I am not proud of. I went to town to grab a few groceries. On the way out the door, I grabbed an SD card. I wanted to check one of my trail cameras that I had right off the driveway road. I didn't like to put my cameras deep in the forest. I feel like that is too much intrusion and pressure on the deer. I like to give them their space and catch them on the way out of their bedding areas and on the exit trails. When I was coming back from town, I almost forgot to check my camera, so I quickly slowed down and pulled over to the side of the upper driveway road. Nothing seemed out of the usual, and it was like any other day. I made my way back to my red Mustang, and I was standing there for a while as I was preparing to make my way back to the house so I could check the SD card on my computer. Out of nowhere, I heard a loud whistle. I turned my head quickly to the left and looked down the long circle driveway road. My first thought was my dad was on the property, and he was coming to see what I was doing. As fast as the first whistle happened, another one came from directly in front of me. It was just as loud as the first whistle. The tone of the whistle was slightly different. It sounded like it was dual-toned. The best way I could describe it is it had the same whistle as the first individual, but it also had the sound of like a water droplet. Sure enough, before I could process what was going on, a third whistle happened to my right. Each whistle came from approximately 30 to 40 yards away from me, just far enough into the deep forest where I couldn't see what was making the sounds. I never saw anyone, and nobody was in the forest. I couldn't hear any footsteps or odd sounds. I didn't smell anything unusual. Everything seemed to be normal other than the 3 human whistles that just went off around me. I continued my way home to check the trail camera pictures as I kept wondering in the back of my head, what the heck were those whistles? I didn't see how much all this affected me until I look back on the situation now. My human instincts told me to just shrug this off like I did with all the other weird things I have experienced, but my mind wouldn't let it go this time. I guess after being in the woods for almost 30 years, I knew this just was not right. I started thinking about this spot and how all the game really get funneled into one area. I all of a sudden remembered I had found a tree break in this exact same spot years ago. It was very fresh when I first found it. I of course shrugged it off. One of my silly thoughts was, is this Bigfoot? It sounds strange, but I threw it into my realm of possibilities as I always had an interest in the topic. Later on that evening, when it was almost dark, I walked back up the driveway. When I got back to the spot I had parked at earlier in the day, I saw what appeared to be 2 orange lights floating throughout the forest. It came from the direction of the third whistle. The lights seemed to move at a slow pace and were only 3 or 4 feet off the ground. It was about the size of a basketball. My first thought was it was 2 people walking in the woods with cell phones or lanterns. I think in my entire life of living out in these woods, I have only caught one person ever trespassing. I didn't want to walk towards the lights. At the same time, I have heard some strange UFO stories, and I knew better than running towards some strange lights in the middle of nowhere. The lights faded off, and I made my way back to the house. At this point, it was pitch black outside. I decided to walk up the driveway one more time. When I got halfway up the road, I heard a loud thump. Sounded like a deer jumping, just without the running away part. Just one loud thump. I was really creeped out. Something about being here at night compared to the day was completely different. As I said before, there is forest on all sides of me. The creepy factor skyrocketed to a 10 just like that. I tried walking a little further up the road when I heard the loud whoops. The whoops sounded like the ones from the Sierra sounds. After it whooped, it seemed to charge at me and stopped at about 30 or 40 yards in the wood line. I thought to myself, that is no deer. And there seems to be more than one. Now I am starting to think maybe it could be Bigfoot. I walked back towards the house in fear, feeling like someone poured a little bit of cold water down my back. I had the strange feeling on the back of my neck, and all the hairs on my entire body were standing up. It was a shocking feeling. Being out in the dark woods with these creatures is not cool at all. You feel extremely vulnerable. I began to watch Bigfoot shows and documentaries a lot more than I ever did in the past. To my amazement, I ran across a documentary based in Nepal. The woman lived in the Himalayas and described her Yeti encounter. She stated that the creature whistled at her. This shocked me. I guess I didn't know these creatures were capable of doing this. I wanted to know more, and I began walking the driveway road. I did this on a daily and made it part of my routine. Weeks had passed by with no activity. It didn't make any sense to me how I could have so much activity and then all of a sudden nothing. At the time, I thought I was not finding anything, but in reality, I was walking into an area that was inhabited by Sasquatches. I found a strange structure that was in the shape of an arch. It had a tree wedged into it and had many small trees and limbs that seemed to have been placed around it. I didn't think too much of it, but the thought of Bigfoot did linger in the back of my mind. I also found a track off the road. I wasn't sure what I was doing at the time, but I was really searching hard for these creatures. At the time, I tried reaching out to some Bigfoot organizations. I think they thought I was full of crap and didn't know what I was talking about. I wasn't sure if it was possible, but I wanted to know if these things could live in Missouri. After walking the driveway many times, I began to notice mushrooms everywhere. I even saw some edible mushrooms and found a chicken of the woods on my way back home. I gave myself a reason to be in the forest, as you can only walk in the same area so many times until you get bored. One morning I was walking the property, and I noticed the chanterelle mushrooms were growing everywhere. I came back home and grabbed a bag and a camouflage backpack. I picked up so many chanterelles. I started off in one part of the forest and ended up in a complete opposite side. When it was all said and done, my bag was full and I was getting hungry, so I made my way back home. It was about 10:30 a.m. I still had about 150 feet of road until I reached the driveway. I heard what sounded to be a bird or maybe a squirrel. I looked to my left and saw a black mass crouched down at about 30 or 40 yards away. It all of a sudden stood up. I was shocked at what I was seeing. It was a Bigfoot. I wasn't excited or scared. I stared into the forest with my eyes super wide, not sure if what I was seeing was real. The individual seemed to be in a crouch position when I first saw him. He appeared to be 6+ feet tall. I say 6 feet, but it could have been 7. This thing was a big creature. He had a very primate humanoid face to him. He resembled Mike Tyson in the face, very angry looking, and his expression did not change the entire time. His eyes were ink black, it had a flat nose and big brow ridge. His head was round, and the creature looked very old. I still to this day cannot describe the way the lips looked. I want to say it had thin lips, but I still find it difficult to describe. I found a few pictures since then that are almost identical to what I was looking at. He looked at me as soon as he stood up and turned his head back and began walking away. He was jet black and his fur was only about 3 or 4 inches long. I immediately noticed 2 whitish gray stripes going down his back like a skunk. The stripes started at his shoulder blades and went down each side of his vertical column. He also had whitish gray patches on both of his calves. And the arms appeared to have a swinging motion and went down all the way to the individual's knees. The encounter was almost identical to the Patterson film. Even the direction the creature was walking was the same. The way it looked my direction a few times to see if I was following him, it was all almost identical except a few features and facial differences. The Sasquatch walked quartering away from me, heading towards the creek bottom, and disappeared into the thick Missouri forest. He appeared to be very confident in the way he moved. The Sasquatch did not run, just casually walked off into the forest. It was as if he was aware of his size and knew I wouldn't follow him. I wasn't sure if what I saw was real. I was still shocked at what I had seen and was wrestling in my own mind if what I had seen was actually reality. I quickly walked the remaining distance I had to get back to the driveway and continued across the yard. I was trying to cut this thing off to make sure I knew what I saw. I stepped over the old rusted barbed wire fence at the opposite side of the yard and crossed back into the forest. I heard what sounded like a horse. I could hear deep breathing and exhaling of the breath. From where I was standing, I could not see the Bigfoot. He was obscured by all the brush, and I could only hear him. This was confirmation that I was not crazy. At least to myself anyways. I took a few steps back, crossed back over the fence, and walked back to my house. There was no more evidence I needed. Now I know everything that I have experienced was Bigfoot. The screams I heard in the past, the trees being pushed over, and the whistles. All of this was Bigfoot. I do feel like if I would have went any further, my life could have been in danger. All of the encounters happened on the game trails. I do feel like the individual was feeding on the wide variety of mushrooms that were growing in the area. The experience changed my life and made me a more active person. I also feel like I have a great responsibility to tell people about my experiences and to help others who have encountered the same anomalies. Many strange events began to take place on the property after the sighting. Stick around for the next chapter of the story. Let me know your guys' thoughts and feelings on how everything played out. I would really like to know if you guys have had similar stories or maybe encounters. Let me know in the comments below.